Lin Wanqing opened her eyes and saw a ceiling she had not seen in 3 years. For moments she could not breathe. The paint was cracked in the same corner she remembered. The smell of old wood and cheap detergent filled the small room. She sat up slowly, her heart pounding, and looked down at her hands. They were smaller, softer, without the thin white scar she had earned in her last year of life. She was young again, 20 years old again, alive again. Wanqing pressed a hand against her chest and tried to steady her breathing. The memories came back to her in pieces, sharp and painful, like broken glass. She remembered the wedding dress that was never finished. She remembered her fiancé, Chan Hao, holding another woman's hand while he smiled at her with empty eyes. She remembered her own stepsister, Lin Ruoxi, whispering lies into the ears of everyone who mattered. She remembered the accusations, the theft she never committed, the trial that ended with her name dragged through mud. She remembered dying alone in a cold hospital room with no one beside her. And now somehow she was back to the night before her life fell apart. She got out of bed and walked to the small mirror on her wall. The face looking back at her was young and unmarked by grief, but her eyes held the weight of everything she had lived through. She was the same Lin Wanqing on the outside. Inside, she was someone else entirely. Someone who had already lost everything once and would not lose it again. Downstairs, she heard her stepmother's voice, sharp and sweet at the same time, the way it always was before it turned cruel. Wanqing did not go down right away. She sat on the edge of her bed and made a decision. This time, she would not be foolish. She would not trust blindly. She would not wait for people to hurt her before she protected herself. The charity gala was tonight. She remembered it clearly, because it was the night Chan Hao had first introduced her to the woman he would later leave her for. In her old life, Wanqing had gone to that gala full of hope, wearing a dress she had saved for months to buy, believing her life was about to become perfect. Tonight, she would go for a different reason. She needed to see the people from her past life with clear eyes, not blinded by love or trust. She needed to understand who they really were before they had the chance to destroy her again. By evening, Wanqing stood outside the Grand Hotel where the gala was being held, wearing a simple black dress instead of the extravagant gown she remembered from before. She did not need to shine. She only needed to watch. Inside, the hall glittered with light and wealth. She saw Chan Hao almost immediately, standing near the center of the room, laughing at something a woman beside him had said. The woman was beautiful, confident, dressed in red. Wanqing recognized her at once. In her old life, she had not seen this woman until months later, when the affair could no longer be hidden. Now she saw it from the very beginning, and something inside her hardened rather than broke. There was no pain this time, only clarity. She stepped back from the crowd and moved toward a quieter corner of the room, near the tall windows that looked out over the street. She needed air. She needed distance from people who no longer meant anything to her. That was when she heard the screech of tires outside, followed by a heavy, terrible crash. Wanqing turned quickly and saw a car had struck another vehicle just outside the hotel entrance. People near the windows gasped, and some rushed toward the doors to see what had happened. Wanqing's instincts, sharpened by years of nursing training she had taken up in her old life after losing everything, told her to move immediately. She pushed through the crowd and ran outside before most of the guests had even reached the doors. The scene was worse than she expected. A black car had been struck hard on the driver's side by a delivery truck that had run a red light. The truck driver was already stumbling out, dazed but alive. The man in the black car was not moving. Wanqing reached the car and saw through the shattered window a man slumped against the steering wheel, blood running down the side of his face. She did not know who he was. She only knew that if someone did not act quickly, he would die before the ambulance arrived. She pulled open the damaged door, ignoring the sharp edges of broken glass that cut into her palm. She checked his breathing, tilted his head carefully to keep his airway clear, and pressed her scarf against the wound on his temple to slow the bleeding. His pulse was weak, but present. She kept talking to him, telling him to hold on, even though he could not hear her. Around her, a crowd had gathered, phones out, some filming, none of them helping. A few guests from the gala recognized the car and began whispering urgently to each other. Wanqing heard fragments of their words. Mu Corporation, the young master, Mu Yinqing. She did not know the name well in her old life, only that the Mu family was one of the wealthiest and most private families in the city, rarely appearing in public, never involved in scandal. She had never expected to be kneeling on the street, holding a stranger's head steady, waiting for sirens. When the ambulance finally arrived, the paramedics praised her quick action, saying that her care had likely kept him alive long enough to reach the hospital. She rode with him, still holding pressure on his wound, refusing to let go even as her arms began to shake with fatigue. At the hospital, doctors rushed him into surgery. Wanqing sat in the waiting area, her dress stained with blood, her hands trembling now that the adrenaline had faded. She did not know why she had run toward the crash instead of standing back like everyone else. Perhaps it was the training from her old life. Perhaps it was simply that she could not watch another person die when she might be able to help. Hours later, a doctor came out and told her that the man had survived surgery, though he had slipped into a coma. They said his condition was critical but stable, and that the speed of the first aid he received outside the hotel had made the difference between life and death. Wanqing sat alone in the hospital hallway long after the doctor left. She thought about her old life, about the years she had wasted trusting the wrong people, about the family that had never truly loved her. She thought about the man lying unconscious in the room down the hall, a man she did not know, whose life she had saved without thinking twice. She did not know yet that this single act, born from instinct rather than plan, would change the entire course of her second life. She only knew that for the first time since waking up that morning, she felt like herself again. Not the broken woman who had died alone, but someone new, someone stronger. Outside the hospital window, the city lights glowed against the night sky, indifferent to the small, quiet moment that had just reshaped Lin Wanqing's future. She closed her eyes and allowed herself, just for a moment, to rest. Tomorrow would bring questions. Tomorrow would bring the Mu family, wealth beyond anything she had known, and a path she never could have imagined for herself. But tonight, she simply sat in the silence of the hospital, holding on to the strange, fragile hope that maybe, this time, her life could be different. The next morning, Lin Wanqing woke up in a chair in the hospital hallway, her neck stiff and her dress still stained with dried blood. A nurse gently touched her shoulder and told her that the man she had helped the night before was stable, though still unconscious. Wanqing thanked her and stood, stretching her tired body, and walked toward the small hospital cafeteria to get something to drink. She did not plan on staying. She had done what she could, and the man's family would surely arrive soon to take over his care. But something made her pause outside his room before she left the hospital. Through the glass window of the door, she saw him lying still on the bed, tubes and machines surrounding him, his face pale but calm. He looked younger than she expected, maybe only a few years older than herself. Despite the bandages and bruises, there was something dignified about the way he lay there, as if even unconscious, he carried the weight of responsibility. She did not know why she felt drawn to stay a little longer. Perhaps it was simply human concern. Perhaps some part of her, still healing from her own tragic past life, understood what it meant to be vulnerable and alone. She was still standing near the door when a group of people arrived in a hurry, their expensive clothes and urgent voices immediately drawing attention. At the front was an elegant older woman, her back straight despite her age, her eyes sharp with worry and authority. Wanqing recognized the look of someone used to being obeyed. The woman rushed to the doctor first, demanding information about her grandson's condition. The doctor explained the surgery, the coma, and then, almost as an afterthought, mentioned the young woman who had performed first aid at the scene and very likely saved his life. The older woman turned and looked directly at Wanqing. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then the woman crossed the hallway and took both of Wanqing's hands in hers, her grip surprisingly strong for someone her age. "You saved my grandson," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Thank you. Thank you for what you did." Wanqing shook her head, feeling uncomfortable with the gratitude. "I only did what anyone would do," she said quietly. I'm glad he is still alive. The old woman studied her for a long moment, taking in her tired eyes, her simple clothing, the dried blood still on her hands and dress that she had not yet had the chance to clean. There was no arrogance in the young woman before her, no attempt to use the situation for attention or gain. Only quiet sincerity. What is your name, child? The woman asked. Lin Wanqing. I am Mu Lao Foreign, the woman said, using the formal title that marked her as the matriarch of the Mu family. This is my grandson, Mu Yinqing. He is the head of Mu Corporation. Wanqing already suspected as much from the whispers at the gala the night before, but hearing it confirmed still made her pause. The Mu family was known throughout the city, though rarely seen. Their business empire touched everything from real estate to shipping to finance. And their grandson, the reclusive young CEO, was rumored to be cold, brilliant, and utterly uninterested in public life. Now he lay in a hospital bed, unconscious, his fate uncertain. Mu Lao Foreign did not let go of Wanqing's hands. Please, she said, let me arrange for you to be looked after. You are injured, and you have done our family an enormous service. Wanqing tried to refuse politely, insisting that she needed nothing in return, but the old woman was firm, in the gentle but unshakable way of someone accustomed to caring for others whether they wanted it or not. Within the hour, Wanqing found herself given a private room to clean up, fresh clothes brought to her by hospital staff at the family's request, and a warm meal she had not realized she desperately needed. Over the following days, Wanqing found herself returning to the hospital, not because anyone asked her to, but because she could not quite bring herself to walk away. She told herself it was simple curiosity, or perhaps a lingering sense of responsibility since she had been the one to find him. In truth, something about the quiet hospital room and the still, silent man lying in the bed had settled into her thoughts in a way she did not fully understand. Mu Lao Foreign noticed her visits and welcomed them warmly. The two women began to talk during those quiet afternoons in the hospital corridor, the older woman sharing small stories about her grandson's childhood, about how hard he worked, about how alone he had been since his parents passed away years earlier. Wanqing listened, offering little about her own past, though the old woman seemed to sense there was pain there too. You carry old wounds, Mu Lao Foreign said one afternoon, studying Wanqing's face carefully. I do not ask you to share them, but I see them. Wanqing only smiled faintly and said nothing. Meanwhile, whispers had begun to spread through the upper circles of the city. The news that the young master of the Mu family had been in a serious accident and now lay comatose reached the ears of distant relatives who had long resented being kept at the edges of the family's fortune. Within a week, cousins and uncles who had rarely visited before Yinqing's accident began appearing at the hospital, their concern thin and their questions about the company's leadership far too eager. Mu Lao Foreign watched these visitors with narrowed eyes, understanding exactly what they wanted. With her grandson unconscious and unable to defend his position, the company's control was vulnerable, and predators within the family were already circling. It was during one such tense afternoon, after a particularly unpleasant visit from a cousin who had not so subtly suggested that someone should be appointed to temporarily manage the company's affairs, that Mu Lao Foreign sat down heavily in a chair and pressed her fingers to her temples. Wanqing, who had been sitting nearby, poured her a cup of tea without a word. Thank you, child, the old woman said, taking the cup gratefully. She studied Wanqing over the rim of the tea for a long moment. You are kind. You are honest. These are rare qualities in the world I live in. Wanqing did not know how to respond, so she simply inclined her head. Mu Lao Foreign set down her tea and looked at her with the sharp, calculating gaze of a woman who had spent decades protecting her family from those who wished to take advantage of them. An idea had begun to form in her mind, one that felt both bold and strangely right. Lin Wanqing, she said slowly, I wonder if you might be willing to help my family once again. Wanqing looked up, uncertain what the old woman meant, but sensing that whatever came next would change the course of her life far more than she could yet imagine. Wanqing sat quietly, waiting for Mu Lao Foreign to continue. The old woman's eyes were steady, thoughtful, the kind of look that came from a lifetime of making difficult decisions. "My grandson is unconscious," Mu Lao Foreign began, "and while he sleeps, vultures circle. Distant relatives who never once visited this family in 10 years now suddenly appear, asking about company shares and management rights. They believe that because Yining cannot speak for himself, they can take what belongs to him." She paused, folding her hands in her lap. "There is a way to protect him and to protect the company until he wakes. If he had a wife, a legal spouse, the board of directors and the family charter would require that any major decisions include her voice. It would close the door that these relatives are trying to open." Wanqing understood immediately what the old woman was suggesting, and her breath caught in her throat. "You want me to marry him," she said slowly, "while he's like this?" "I know it is a strange request," Mu Lao Foreign said gently. "I do not ask this lightly, and I do not ask it only for the family's benefit. You have already shown yourself to be someone of good character, someone who acted without hesitation to save a stranger's life, who has visited him with no expectation of reward. I trust you more than I trust my own blood relatives right now." Wanqing sat in silence, her mind racing. In her old life, marriage had been a trap that led to heartbreak and betrayal. She had sworn to herself, waking up in her young body again, that she would never again tie her fate to someone else's whims. And yet, this was different. This was not a marriage built on love or promises that could be broken. It was practical, honest in its purpose, and it offered her something she desperately needed in this second life: protection, stability, and a family that did not yet know how to hurt her. She thought of her stepmother's house, where she currently lived, where every day brought some small cruelty disguised as concern. She thought of Chun Hao, who in this life had not yet betrayed her, but surely would again if she let him close. She thought of the years stretching ahead of her, and the choice between walking that same broken path or stepping onto one that was unfamiliar but perhaps safer. "What happens if he wakes up?" Wanqing asked quietly, "and does not want a wife he never chose?" Mu Lao Foreign's expression softened. "Then we will handle that when it comes. I will make sure you are protected, no matter what happens between the two of you. This is not a trap for you, child. It is a shield for both of you." Wanqing looked toward the hospital room, where Mu Yining lay still and silent, unaware that his fate and hers were being decided in a conversation happening just outside his door. She thought about who he might be when he woke, whether he would resent her, whether he would see her as an opportunist despite the truth of how this had come to be. But she also thought about her own survival. In her old life, she had waited for others to decide her fate and had paid the price for her passivity. This time, she would choose her own path, even if the choice looked unconventional to the rest of the world. "I will do it," Wanqing said finally. "But I want to understood clearly. I'm not doing this for money or for the Mu name. I am doing this because you have shown me kindness and because I believe it is the right thing to do." Mu Lao Foreign's eyes grew misty, and she reached out to squeeze Wanqing's hand. "You're a good girl. I promise you, this family will not forget your kindness." The arrangements moved quickly after that. Because Mu Yining was unconscious, the marriage required special legal steps, with Mu Lao Foreign acting on his behalf through documented power of attorney that had been established years earlier for business emergencies. Lawyers were brought in, documents were signed, and within 2 weeks, Lin Wanqing became legally married to a man who did not know her name. The wedding, if it could be called that, was small and quiet, held in a private room of the hospital with only a handful of family members and a solemn officiant present. Wanqing wore a simple pale dress instead of a wedding gown, and she stood beside Yinqing's hospital bed as vows were read aloud on his behalf, his still form the only witness to the strange beginning of their union. Afterward, she was moved into the Mu family estate, a sprawling property on the edge of the city, surrounded by tall trees and quiet gardens. The house was grander than anything she had lived in during her old life, filled with elegant furniture and quiet, efficient staff who greeted her with polite bows and curious glances. Wanqing felt like an outsider in those early days, unsure of her place in a household so far removed from anything she had known. But Mu Lao Foreign made a point of introducing her personally to the staff, insisting that she be treated not as a guest, but as the lady of the house. News of the marriage spread quickly through the city's elite circles, and reactions were mixed. Some praised the family for finding a way to protect the company during such a difficult time. Others whispered that the young woman must have manipulated her way into the family's fortune, using the accident as an opportunity. Wan Qing heard these rumors, but chose not to respond to them, focusing instead on settling into her new life and learning the rhythms of the household. Meanwhile, the greedy relatives who had begun circling the family's assets found their plans abruptly halted. With a legal spouse now holding a voice in the company's affairs, alongside Mu Lao Foreign's continued sharp oversight, the loopholes they had hoped to exploit closed one by one. Wan Qing, though new to this world, listened carefully during family meetings, offering quiet but insightful observations that surprised even the seasoned board members. She visited Yinqing's hospital room daily, sitting beside his bed for an hour or more, sometimes reading aloud from books she found in the estate's library, sometimes simply sitting in silence, watching his chest rise and fall steadily. She did not know if he could hear her, but something about the quiet ritual comforted her. One evening, as she sat beside him with a book open on her lap, she found herself talking softly, not reading from the pages, but sharing pieces of her own thoughts instead. "I do not know if you can hear me," she said quietly, "but I promise you, I did not marry you for your fortune. I promise I will protect this family while you cannot. And when you wake up, if you are angry with me for this, I will understand." The machines beeped steadily beside her, and the man in the bed remained still, unaware of the promise being made to him in the quiet of that hospital room. Wan Qing closed the book, reached out, and gently rested her hand near his on the blanket, then sat back and let the silence settle around them both, unaware of how much closer that moment had brought her to the life she never expected to find. Weeks turned into months, and Lin Wan Qing slowly began to settle into her new life at the Mu family estate. What had started as an arrangement born of necessity slowly became something that felt, strangely, like a home. She woke each morning to the sound of birds in the garden instead of her stepmother's sharp voice, and she found herself, for the first time in either of her lives, surrounded by people who seemed to genuinely care for her well-being. Mu Lao Foreign treated her with a warmth that went beyond simple gratitude. The old woman began inviting her for morning tea, teaching her about the family's history, the businesses they managed, and the responsibilities that would eventually fall to whoever stood beside Yinqing. She spoke to Wan Qing not as an outsider being tolerated, but as a granddaughter being prepared for a future role. "You have a sharp mind," Mu Lao Foreign told her one morning, watching as Wan Qing reviewed a stack of documents related to one of the family's smaller companies. "Sharper than most people give you credit for." Wan Qing smiled but said nothing about the true source of her insight. In her old life, she had spent years after her downfall working odd jobs, including 2 years as an assistant in a small trading firm, where she had learned, through hard experience, how businesses could be manipulated and how contracts could hide dangerous clauses. She also remembered, faintly but usefully, several business failures and scandals that had rocked the city in the years following this point in time. She did not explain any of this to the family, but she used the knowledge quietly, offering suggestions here and there that always seemed to prove correct. Yinqing's younger siblings, a brother named Mu Yinxiu and a sister named Mu Wanru, had been cautious around her at first, uncertain what to make of their brother's sudden and unusual marriage. But Wan Qing's patience and sincerity slowly won them over. She helped Yinxiu prepare for an important university interview, staying up late with him reviewing possible questions. She sat with Wanru during a difficult breakup, offering comfort without judgment. Over time, the siblings began to treat her not as their brother's strange, convenient wife, but as an older sister they had somehow gained through fortune. The household staff, too, grew fond of her. Wan Qing never treated them with the cold distance that some wealthy families expected. She learned their names, asked about their families, and thanked them sincerely for their work. The head housekeeper, an older woman named Annie Zhou, once remarked to another staff member that in all her years working for the Mu family, She had never met a mistress of the house who treated everyone with such genuine respect. But even as Wanqing settled into this new life, she remained alert. She remembered too well how quickly comfort could turn into disaster, how easily trust could be exploited. She kept a careful eye on the business dealings happening around her, particularly a shipping contract that Mu Corporation had been negotiating with a partner company before Yinqing's accident. In her old life, Wanqing had heard, long after the fact, about a massive scandal involving a shipping company that had secretly been smuggling goods through legitimate contracts, eventually collapsing and dragging down several of its business partners in fraud investigations. The name of that company had stayed in her memory only because the scandal had been so widely reported at the time. Now, reviewing documents in the Mu family study one evening, she recognized that very name on a proposed partnership agreement waiting for board approval. Her heart raced as she read through the contract details. If this deal moved forward as planned, the Mu Corporation would be deeply entangled with a company that in her old life had collapsed under criminal investigation only a year and a half later, taking its partners down with it. She brought her concerns to Mu Lao Foreign the next morning, carefully choosing her words to explain her unease without revealing the impossible truth of how she knew what she knew. "Something about this partnership feels wrong," she said, laying out the documents on the table between them. "The financial structure is unusual, the ownership behind their holding company is unclear, and I have a feeling, call it instinct if you like, that this company is hiding something serious." Mu Lao Foreign studied her carefully, then studied the documents. She had learned over the past months to trust Wanqing's instincts, even when she could not always explain the reasoning behind them. She called for an emergency meeting with the board, insisting on a delay to the partnership vote and requesting a deeper investigation into the company's background. The board members grumbled about the delay, some annoyed that a decision was being questioned based on the vague concerns of the young master's wife. But Mu Lao Foreign held firm, and eventually an independent investigator was brought in to examine the potential partner more closely. It took 3 weeks, but the investigation uncovered evidence of falsified shipping manifests and connections to an ongoing customs fraud case that had not yet become public knowledge. The partnership was quietly and swiftly canceled, sparing Mu Corporation from what would have been a devastating entanglement. Word of the incident spread through the family and the company's senior staff. What had seemed like a strange and hasty judgment call from an outsider now looked like remarkable foresight. Board members who had once viewed Wanqing with skepticism began treating her with newfound respect. Mu Lao Foreign, prouder than ever of her decision to bring Wanqing into the family, began including her in more significant discussions about the company's future. Wanqing, for her part, remained humble about the praise, deflecting credit whenever possible. She knew the truth was far stranger than anyone could imagine, and she had no intention of trying to explain it. Instead, she quietly continued her routine, splitting her days between learning the family's businesses and visiting Yinqing's hospital room each evening. His condition remained unchanged for months, the doctors offering only cautious hope that he might eventually wake, though they could not say when. Wanqing had grown used to the quiet ritual of sitting beside his bed, and in a strange way, those visits had become the calmest part of her days. She told him about the shipping deal she had helped uncover, about Yinchu's successful university interview, about small moments in the garden where the flowers had begun to bloom. She did not know if any part of him could hear her voice, but she continued speaking regardless, as if some quiet part of her believed the words mattered, even to a man who could not respond. One evening, as autumn settled over the estate and the leaves outside his hospital window began to turn gold, Wanqing sat beside him as usual, her hand resting near his on the blanket. She had grown so used to the stillness of these visits that she almost missed it when, for the briefest moment, his fingers twitched beneath her hand. She froze, staring down at his hand, uncertain if she had imagined it. The room was silent except for the steady beep of the machines. She waited, holding her breath, watching closely. And then, faintly, his fingers moved again. Wanqing sat frozen for a long moment, her eyes fixed on Yinqing's hand, waiting to see if it would move again. When his fingers twitched a third time, curling slightly against the blanket, she jumped to her feet and rushed to the door, calling urgently for the nurse on duty. Within minutes, the quiet hospital room filled with doctors and nurses, machines were checked, and careful tests were run. Wanqing stood back near the wall, her heart pounding, watching as the medical team worked around the man she had spent months caring for without ever hearing his voice. Mu Lao Foreign arrived soon after, alerted by an urgent phone call, and gripped Wanqing's hand tightly as they waited together outside the room. It took 2 more days of gradual, careful monitoring before Mu Yinqing's eyes finally opened. When he woke, he was disoriented, his mind foggy from months of unconsciousness. He blinked slowly at the white ceiling above him, listened to unfamiliar beeping sounds, and tried to piece together where he was and what had happened. A doctor leaned over him, speaking gently, explaining that he had been in an accident and had been in a coma for several months. Yinqing struggled to process the information. The last thing he remembered clearly was leaving a business dinner, driving through the city at night, and then nothing. Months had passed. His body felt weak and unfamiliar, his thoughts slow to catch up with the strange new reality being explained to him. It was during this disorienting haze that the doctor mentioned, almost casually, that his wife had been informed and was on her way to see him. Yinqing frowned. "My wife," he repeated slowly. "I do not have a wife." The doctor exchanged an uncertain glance with the nurse beside him, but did not elaborate further, leaving that explanation to the family. When Mu Lao Foreign entered the room moments later, tears in her eyes, relief washing over her weathered face, Yinqing managed a weak smile despite his confusion. His grandmother held his hand tightly, speaking softly about how worried the family had been, how long they had waited for this moment. "Grandmother," he said, his voice hoarse and unfamiliar even to his own ears, "the doctor mentioned something about a wife. I do not understand." Mu Lao Foreign's expression softened, and she began, carefully and gently, to explain everything that had happened during the months he had been unconscious. She told him about the accident, about the relatives who had tried to exploit his condition, about the young woman who had saved his life outside the hotel and who had since become not only his legal wife, but an invaluable member of the family. Yinqing listened in stunned silence, his exhausted mind struggling to absorb the sheer scale of what had occurred without his knowledge or consent. A marriage to a stranger, while he lay unconscious and unable to object. He should have been angry. Some part of him, the sharp, controlled businessman who had built much of his reputation on caution and calculated decisions, bristled at the idea of his life being rearranged without his input. But as his grandmother continued speaking, describing how this woman had sat beside his bed nearly every evening for months, how she had protected the company from a devastating partnership, how she had won over his siblings and staff with quiet sincerity, his irritation slowly gave way to curiosity. "Where is she now?" he asked finally. As if summoned by the question, the door opened, and Wanqing stepped inside. She looked tired, her hair slightly disheveled from rushing to the hospital, but her eyes were bright with cautious hope. She stopped a short distance from the bed, unsure how to approach a man who was legally her husband, but who had never once looked at her with recognition until this very moment. "You're awake," she said softly. Yinqing studied her carefully, taking in every detail. She did not look like someone who had schemed her way into wealth. Her expression held none of the practiced charm he had encountered countless times from women seeking his family's fortune. Instead, there was something quiet and unguarded in the way she looked at him, something that made him pause before speaking. "You are the woman who saved my life," he said slowly, remembering fragments of what his grandmother had just told him. "And apparently my wife." Wanqing nodded, stepping a little closer. "I understand this is strange for you. I never expected any of this either. But your grandmother explained the situation, and I agreed to help protect the company, while you could not. I never meant to trap you into anything." Yinqing studied her for a long moment, his sharp mind, even weakened by months of inactivity, already analyzing her words, her posture, the sincerity in her voice. He was a man who had learned early in life to be wary of everyone, especially those who claimed to want nothing from him. Yet something about her felt different from the countless calculating people who had circled his family over the years. "We will discuss this properly once I have recovered," he said finally, his voice measured but not unkind. "For now, thank you for saving my life, whatever else may be true." Over the following weeks, as Yining slowly regained his strength through physical therapy and careful medical care, he began quietly observing Wanqing whenever she visited. He watched how she interacted with his grandmother, with genuine warmth rather than practiced flattery. He watched how his younger siblings sought her out for advice and comfort, clearly trusting her deeply. He reviewed, with growing disbelief, the details of the shipping deal she had helped uncover, a decision that had saved the company from what could have been a catastrophic scandal. He also noticed the way the household staff spoke of her, always with genuine fondness rather than the careful, distant politeness typically reserved for someone they feared or resented. Slowly, cautiously, his guarded suspicion began to soften into something closer to respect. But recovery brought more than gratitude. As word spread through the business world that Mu Yining had awakened from his coma, old enemies who had assumed him permanently sidelined began to stir. Business rivals who had taken advantage of his absence to make aggressive moves against Mu Corporation's market position now faced the return of a sharp, formidable opponent. Meanwhile, the greedy relatives who had been quietly blocked from exploiting the family's fortune during his unconscious months now shifted their schemes, looking for new ways to challenge the unusual marriage that had protected the company from them. Yining, still regaining his full strength, found himself needing to rely on Wanqing's insight more than he expected, both in the boardroom and within the increasingly tense dynamics of the extended family. Slowly, without either of them fully realizing it, the marriage that had begun as a practical arrangement was becoming something built on genuine partnership and quiet, growing trust. One evening, as Yining sat in the estate's study reviewing company reports with Wanqing beside him offering careful observations, he found himself studying her face rather than the documents in front of him. "Why did you really agree to marry a man you had never met?" he asked quietly. Wanqing considered the question for a long moment before answering honestly. "Because your grandmother showed me kindness when I needed it most, and because I believed it was the right thing to do. I did not expect anything more than that." Yining nodded slowly, his sharp eyes softening slightly as he looked at her. "Perhaps," he said, "we might both find that we gained more than either of us expected." As Mu Yining regained his full strength over the following weeks, the quiet trust between him and Wanqing continued to grow, even as new threats began circling the family from every direction. The relatives who had once hoped to seize control of the company during his coma had not given up. With their earlier plans blocked by the marriage, they shifted tactics, searching for new ways to undermine the union and reclaim influence within the family. It was Yinqing's cousin, a sharp-tongued man named Mu Yining, who led the effort. He had long resented being kept at the edges of the family's core businesses and saw Wanqing as a convenient target. He began spreading rumors among the extended family and within certain business circles, suggesting that Wanqing had manipulated her way into the marriage through calculated timing rather than genuine kindness, and hinting that her sudden business insights were suspicious rather than impressive. At the same time, Wanqing's past began resurfacing in ways she had feared but half expected. Word of her marriage into the wealthy Mu family had reached her old social circle, and it did not take long before Chun Hao, her former fiancé, and her stepsister Lin Ruoshi appeared at the estate gates, requesting to see her under the pretense of reconciliation. Wanqing agreed to meet them, though not out of sentiment. She wanted to face them directly this time, with clear eyes and full control over the situation, rather than allow them to catch her off guard the way they had in her old life. Chun Hao arrived dressed carefully, his charm polished as always, while Ruoshi wore an expression of practiced concern. They sat in one of the estate's smaller sitting rooms, and within minutes, their true intentions became clear. Chun Hao spoke of missing her, of regretting how their engagement had fallen apart, though Wanqing knew from her old life exactly how that betrayal had truly unfolded. Ruoshi, meanwhile, made careful comments about family loyalty, subtly suggesting that Wanqing owed her old family financial support now that she had married into such wealth. Wanqing listened calmly, without anger, and then spoke with a steadiness that surprised them both. "I know exactly what you are both trying to do," she said quietly. "I'm not the same woman you once knew. I do not need your approval, and I will not be manipulated by false concern." Ruashi's expression flickered with irritation before she attempted a different approach, hinting that she had documents and old messages that could embarrass Wanqing publicly if she did not offer some financial assistance. Wanqing, prepared for exactly this kind of tactic given her memories of the past, calmly informed them that the Mu family's legal team had already been briefed on the situation and that any attempt at blackmail would be met with serious legal consequences. The color drained from Ruashi's face, and Chun Hao's charming mask slipped entirely, revealing the calculating opportunist beneath. They left the estate that day with nothing gained, and Wanqing felt, for the first time, a genuine sense of closure regarding the people who had once destroyed her life. Meanwhile, Mu Yinqi's rumors had begun causing enough tension within the extended family that Mu Laoforan called for a formal family meeting to address the growing conflict directly. Yinqing, now fully recovered and back in control of the company's daily operations, attended the meeting alongside Wanqing, presenting a united front against the accusations being spread against her. During the meeting, Yinqi pressed his case aggressively, questioning Wanqing's sudden business insight and suggesting that her involvement in company decisions was inappropriate for someone with no formal background in the industry. Yinqing, sharp and composed despite his months of recovery, calmly dismantled each accusation, pointing to the documented success of the decisions Wanqing had helped guide, including the canceled shipping partnership that had spared the company from what independent investigators later confirmed would have been a catastrophic scandal. "If instinct and insight this accurate is a problem," Yinqing said coolly, looking directly at his cousin, "then perhaps the rest of this board should be asking why none of you noticed the danger in that contract before she did." The room fell silent. Mu Laoforan, watching proudly from her seat at the head of the table, gave a small, satisfied nod. Yinqi, cornered and unable to produce any real evidence to support his accusations, was forced to back down, his influence within the family weakening further as a result of his failed attempt to undermine Wanqing's position. In the weeks that followed, the family's trust in Wanqing only deepened. She was formally welcomed into a more active role within the company's decision-making structure, a rare honor for someone who had entered the family through such unconventional circumstances. Yinqing, too, found himself relying on her judgment more and more, not simply out of necessity, but because he had come to genuinely respect and value her insight. Their relationship, which had begun as a practical arrangement born of crisis, slowly transformed into something neither of them had expected. Late evenings spent reviewing business reports together turned into quiet conversations about their pasts, their hopes, and the strange twist of fate that had brought them together. Yinqing learned, in careful pieces, about the pain Wanqing carried from her old life, though she never revealed the impossible truth of her rebirth. He simply understood that she had suffered greatly before finding her way into his family, and that understanding deepened his protectiveness toward her. One quiet evening in the estate's garden, months after his recovery, Yinqing found Wanqing sitting beneath the same tree where she had once told him, while he lay unconscious, that she would protect his family no matter what happened between them. He sat down beside her, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. "I know our marriage did not begin the way most marriages do," he said finally, "but I do not regret it. Not anymore." Wanqing looked at him, surprised by the quiet sincerity in his voice. "Neither do I," she said softly. Yinqing reached out and gently took her hand, the same hand he remembered stirring against her fingers as he slowly returned to consciousness months earlier. "Then let us make sure that from here forward, this marriage is no longer simply an arrangement," he said. "Let it be something real." Wanqing felt tears gather in her eyes, not from sadness, but from a quiet, overwhelming relief she had not allowed herself to feel in either of her lives. For the first time since waking up in her younger body, she felt truly safe, truly valued, and truly loved by people who had chosen her not out of obligation, but out of genuine care. In the months that followed, the greedy relatives who had once circled the family faded into irrelevance, their schemes exposed and their influence diminished. Chun Hao and Ruashi disappeared from Wanqing's life entirely, their attempts at manipulation having failed completely. The Mu family, once fractured by suspicion and old resentments, grew stronger and more united, anchored by the quiet strength of a young woman who had once simply stopped to help a stranger on the side of the road. Lin Wanqing, reborn into a second chance at life, had not only survived the mistakes of her past, but had built something far greater than she ever imagined possible. Surrounded by a loving family, a devoted husband, and the quiet peace of a life finally free from betrayal, she embraced her new beginning with open arms, grateful, at last, for the strange and unexpected road that had led her home.